Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, June 23rd, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you about space exploration, transhumanism, and many other related topics affecting the future of our species, hopefully a species that will become multiplanetary not too long from now. So joining us today is our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and advisors, including our Director of Visual Art and current Vice Chairman, Art Ramon Garcia, our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential candidate, and our Director of Community and Citizen Science, Daniel Tweed, and our Foreign Ambassador in Spain, as well as our Technology Advisor, Dr. Jose Cordeiro. Welcome to our panel. And our special guest for today is Tim Wass, who, among his numerous other pursuits, is an adjunct professor of public speaking at Crowder College, a volunteer civilian service ambassador for the United States Space Force, as well as a partner in the SpaceTech Academy. And I will mention Tim Wass is a polymath. He is knowledgeable in numerous disciplines. He is an expert in history and military strategy, as well as an accomplished speechwriter. I've had interactions with him on Facebook over the years. Many of you know I like to post historical artworks as part of my virtual travel series. So Tim and I got into some explorations of Winston Churchill, because Winston Churchill was also a bit of a polymath, an artist, and a master orator. So Tim shared with me some insights from Winston Churchill's career as a public speaker and what makes for effective public speaking. So Tim, I am quite pleased to have you join us as a guest today. And as a first opening question, tell us about the medal that you're wearing.
Yes, if you can see this a little bit up close, this is Phi Kappa Phi, which was formed in 1897, which is the most exclusive college honor society in higher education for the top 1% of graduate students nationwide. So that's a little bit about that. And Filio Capios Philosophos means to spread the love of wisdom across the world, which is our motto, Phi Kappa Phi. Thank you.
Spreading the love of wisdom across the world. Well, that aligns perfectly with the purpose of our virtual enlightenment salons. So I think that is an excellent accessory for you to have. And of course, you are wearing quite an impressive space-themed shirt. Hopefully, these are views that our species and ourselves will be able to experience. I think it's Star Trek themed as well. So yes. Tell us a bit about how you first became interested in space exploration, your journey into this field, which of course you've been involved in extensively.
Well, when I was a kid, I had autism on the spectrum for Asperger's, or ASPE, and now I'm a board member of ASPE International, that the chairman is Elon Musk. That's how I got hired for VP of the Mars missions for SpaceX now, as part of my dedicated work throughout my entire life to explore space. And I got excited when I was in kindergarten because we just got satellite TV for the first time, and my dad had me watch the original series of Star Trek, which this is the Starship Enterprise USS NCC-1701, the original, and it inspired popular culture like Martin Luther King Jr. Time magazine did an article on him, MLK Loves Star Trek, and he got Nichelle Nichols, who was going to quit the show to stay on there as a black actress because he said that she was inspiring his young black kids to join NASA. And that is so important for pop culture. And when I was at the Catalyst campus in April in Colorado Springs for NORAD headquarters, Peterson Space Force Base, I got to meet and get the business card of Admiral Tracy Hines, who said that MLK through Star Trek inspired her to join the Navy. And now people are asking, why are you part of Space Force if you're Navy? Well, she said, Captain Kirk, Admiral Kirk. I mean, it's Navy terms. So that's what got me into space. And now we are working on wearespacetech.com, which is SpaceTech Academy, which is teaching kids STEAM, not just STEM, for science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So we want to have the whole 9 yards, not just part of an education, to be well balanced. And that's what I do as a professor of public speaking. And I wrote the book, How to Persuade People the Winston Churchill Way. And just send me an email at tim.wass@wearespacetech.com. And I can go ahead and send that to you for free, or it's on Amazon with a 4.8 out of 5 ratings on there. So for the stars. So our motto is Ad Astra, to the stars. And that's all I have to say about my intro. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim. And anybody who is interested in the work of the SpaceTech Academy, please check out wearespacetech.com. Also, I think, Tim, some people will be interested to take you up on your generous offer of your book on public speaking and the Winston Churchill way. So I would encourage anybody who is interested to email tim.wass@wearespacetech.com. And now I wanted to ask you a bit more about the Space Force. You are a volunteer civilian service ambassador with the Space Force. You have a Space Force hat on. So how did you get involved with them? And tell us more about what the Space Force does, because it's a new branch of the U.S. Armed Services, and not a lot of people are familiar at this point about the Space Force's activities, but perhaps you can educate us a bit.
Yes, Space Force was formed under the Trump administration through 2017, and the newest, and I would say the best space branch, because we are not just civilian like many other organizations on this. We are incorporating civilian and military. So that's why I'm able to do this as a volunteer civilian through the Space Force, because back in November, I was invited to help join them on a round table discussion on that. And that's how I got invited out to NORAD and Peterson Space Force Base out in Colorado Springs for the Catalyst campus for private-public partnerships, because we want to embolden people like Scott Tibbetts, for instance. I got to meet him out there. His new book is From the Garage to Mars, Scott Tibbetts, and he's an engineer that worked through Starsys, is his company, to have over 350 space vessels under his tutelage to be able to launch through NASA and now through Space Force. And Space Force, what we do, I am in Delta 13, which is leadership training. And if you look on my LinkedIn page, just look up Honey Badger. That's my call sign, because Honey Badger don't care. And the story behind that is they were asking, can you get this done below budget, ahead of schedule, Professor Wass? And I said, Honey Badger don't care. We can do it. Because I look at other people, I learn from others, their mistakes and their triumphs, how they do it. It's like Elon Musk. How did he learn about rocketry? He read about the cosmonaut program for the Soviet Union. He looked that up. Von Braun actually wrote a book in 1952. You can look it up on foxbusiness.com. Elon Musk going to Mars, where it had Von Braun predicts 1952 book novel on colonizing Mars, and he said the leader would be Elon. Now, I'm not saying that's prophecy or anything, but my great aunt Charlotte Fries at the Pentagon, she was a civilian photographer. She dated Von Braun and helped convert him to Christianity. And that's why I'm a good, strong member of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, because we believe in faith, hope, and charity, and extraterrestrials and eternal progression to evolve exponentially on the scale, on the Kardashev scale, if you've heard that, for advanced spacefaring civilization. So I think the final frontier is not the final frontier at all. There's much work to be done, but we can do it as a team. That's why we're forming an A-team at wearespacetech.com, and my activism as well through studentsforliberty.org, because we hope that as a nonpartisan organization, we can spread the hope of freedom everywhere across the world. And we had Elon Musk give a virtual roundtable for Students for Liberty just about a month ago, and it went over very well. We had 5 continents represented: North and South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim. And we may follow up on some of the threads of conversation that you mentioned, because there's certainly a lot to discuss there, both about the origins of the U.S. space program with Wernher von Braun, of course, who was a renowned rocket scientist who originally worked for Nazi Germany, but he was persuaded to work for the US government instead. And he actually had some really intricate concepts for orbital space habitats that I wish had been realized.
Spinning ring.
Indeed, indeed. And then later on in this salon, we should definitely discuss your interest in transhumanism and Mormon transhumanism in particular, since we've had Carl Youngblood and Lincoln Cannon, both of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, as guests on our prior salons. Right now, though, I would like to delve a bit more into the subject of space, because there is so much there that we can talk about. So first of all, some of our viewers have questions about the SpaceTech Academy, and Nathan Boyd wonders if there is a K through 12 educational program or educational initiatives of any sort through the SpaceTech Academy.
Yes, we're based out of Oxford University at the Fermi Building, and yes, indeed, it is for K through 12. That is our target audience, most of all, because colleges have them left and right on there, but we need to teach the kids young on this stuff. Like when I was a kid, my Achilles heel was math. I was like, algebra. I'm not going to use the quadratic equation. Let me learn history. Let me learn metaphors, that type of communication. So I focused on my strengths and avoided my weaknesses as much as the SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So that's what I looked at as far as that education. So yes, K through 12 is covered for wearespacetech.com.
Very good. Thank you, Tim. And what are some of the educational techniques that the SpaceTech Academy pursues? Because as we know, in the contemporary world, the old industrial era educational system has become obsolete, and it's leaving many kids behind. But on the other hand, kids have a lot of enthusiasm that can potentially be channeled into worthwhile endeavors. And if we think of prior generations, people who are, let's say, in their 60s right now, who grew up during the space race, they have a lot of enthusiasm for space because education at that time did emphasize the importance of this kind of progress for humankind. And right now, the conventional school system is really failing many kids, because kids who are growing up, and teenagers, people in their 20s, they don't seem to have that kind of techno-optimism. They don't seem to have that kind of enthusiasm about humankind's expansion, about the value of progress, and they don't seem to have a hopeful view of the future. But an initiative like the SpaceTech Academy could turn that situation around. So what are some of the methods, some of the techniques that you are using in order to effectuate that shift?
Well, we use both quantitative and qualitative methods of reasoning to help the students learn about the Socratic method of reason and debate. And we use infotainment, so through games, through storytelling, audiovisual learning facilities to help teach kids, on how to become experts in whatever field of space exploration they'd like to do, whether it's engineering or satellite tracking or launches for like the Raptor engine that we have at SpaceX, and the Starship, what goes in behind that? Why do we use stainless steel versus nanocarbon fibers because it's a lot more sturdy. And the other day we just had our 300th flight that's back and forth for the boosters to re-land for the same missions. It's a little crusty, kind of like aged barrels, I guess you could say, for bourbon in Kentucky, to use a metaphor, but it's reusable and reliable and recyclable, most of all to save taxpayer money. So it gets kids inspired to give them a hope for the future to a multi-planetary society. And through pop culture, we can reach them to be inspired for the hard part, the engineering, the math, everything that goes behind that. Because like artificial intelligence, our AI allies, like NVIDIA CEO for the chip company, the highest valued Wall Street stock right now, NVIDIA, he says within 5 years, we're not going to have to do coding anymore. All the artificial intelligence is going to do it for us. We're just going to be prompt engineers like ChatGPT or OpenAI at Microsoft Bing or Gemini at Google. And Ray Kurzweil says within 8 years, by when the article came out, by 2030, he said we'll have microscopic nano robotics in our blood cells that'll cure cancer within 8 years. So live long enough to live forever. So I hope I didn't get off track that much on there, but that's how we inspire the future, by looking at what inspired the past.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And it's interesting that you brought Ray Kurzweil into this conversation. If you're helping young people to understand Ray Kurzweil's technological predictions and his vision for really dramatic, highly transformational technological progress to come extremely soon, then that indeed could reorient a lot of young people toward a much more hopeful vision. We have some interesting comments in our chat. Rudy Hoffman says, yes, I agree with the lack of enthusiasm observation. Most people and kids today don't seem to have that enthusiasm about progress, despite progress studies, which is a relatively new discipline. We had a salon about it with Jason Crawford, showing how much better life is now due to modernity. And Ray Kurzweil actually has a new book coming out on June 25th, in 2 days from now, called The Singularity is Nearer. I had the occasion to discuss it with Dr. Jose Cordeiro during our interview at Longevity Summit Dublin, which aired during last Sunday's salon. And I wanted to bring in Dr. Jose Cordeiro into this conversation, in part because of his familiarity with Ray Kurzweil and his work, but also because Jose has been a participant in a simulated Mars mission. And I wanted to get Jose's thoughts about that as an educational approach, as well as what it taught him about some of the challenges and some of the methods involved in space exploration, and also any questions, Jose, that you might have for Tim. Please feel free to ask.
Yes, and first of all, it is a pleasure to be here and to listen to Tim. And I do have a few questions. To begin with, for example, a few days ago, there was a report about the kidneys of mice having a lot of trouble under microgravity. And as you know, space travel is very dangerous. It's dangerous because of radiation, because of no gravity, because of many things happening in space. So have you read that report about kidney problems with mice? Because that is a big issue, because going to Mars is going to take 6 months with current technology. And that is a long, long time. So if our kidneys fell in the middle of the trip, that would be a disaster. And I trained, as Gennady was explaining, I trained to be an astronaut in Spain. There is a facility that trains astronauts for the European Space Agency. It is called Astroland. I will send information if you are interested to train officially or unofficially to go to Mars. So that is really interesting. But okay, kidneys on the way to Mars. Tim, what is your take on that?
Yes, thank you. That is brand new information to me, but not outside the realm of any pseudoscience. That is the correct way to look at microgravity on kidneys and our other organs and everything like blood flow. That's why I believe everything that we design needs to be like a von Braun spinning ring to have artificial gravity. Just like if you remember Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey, the Stanley Kubrick movie, where they had that type of infrastructure on there. So that will give gravity for the astronauts to help them train and exercise every day, because Mars only has 38% of the gravity of Earth. So that's low gravity, easy to walk around, but it also disintegrates future generations, the bone structure, as we evolve colonies on Mars. And it's once every 2 years that we come around to be close enough to Mars to send a mission out there to them. And as far as that goes, one thing that I learned is you said 6 months to get to Mars. Well, at the space station, we have one of the astronauts on there has been over 1 year in space without low gravity, and he's okay right now so far. So over a year in space. So I say look at what we've done in the International Space Station to see how well we'll do on the moon, Mars, and even Venus now. We've heard some people want to have like floating cities on Venus. So I look forward to that discussion as well. Did I answer your question? Is there anything else I need to say?
Well, yeah, a very good point, because it is 6 months, but that is only to go there. Then we have to wait, as you said, because the orbits of the Earth and of Mars only are close enough every 2 years. So basically, the trip is going to be very long, 2 years, if we come back. And then we are going to be undergoing many metabological changes to our body. So, and we are discovering more and more. So I think it is really exciting. But how about just sending robots? I also love robots. And robots are stronger than we are, and they can replace body parts much more easily than us. So how about robotic exploration?
Well, to take that point even further, besides robotic exploration, we could have cybernetic exploration, where we upload our minds to an avatar robot, either through virtual reality on Earth through base, or actually the robot itself. Like Mormon Transhumanist Association, we believe that we have salvation through science, as well as faith, and also advancements in technology. So that is a very important point. Thank you. Robots are important, and we should focus on both as much as possible. And then a third way, cybernetic, human and computer interface, kind of like Iron Man from Marvel Comics you could think of at Disney.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And of course, fairly recently, on April 21st, 2024, the U.S. Transhumanist Party held a virtual Enlightenment Salon with our friend Mike DeVerde, who discussed some of the dangers of radiation to astronauts. And he also favors a robot-oriented approach to space exploration and development, at least until the point where we can devise effective approaches for shielding astronauts from that radiation and build habitats for them that are resistant to that radiation. So I would encourage everyone to watch that salon with Mike DeVerde. Furthermore, here is a concept image for Wernher von Braun's space station from 1952. It's a painting by the great Chesley Bonestell, who lived close to 100 years. I think he lived around 98 years, and he was one of the prime space illustrators who really got people enthusiastic about space exploration during the mid-20th century. So I would like to see some of these space stations in orbit soon. And Art Ramon wonders, as part of the questions that we've received on space exploration, is it possible to create Earth types of gravity on Mars? Because Mars has a lot less gravitational attraction, and as Jose mentioned, that could lead to some system damage to organisms that are used to the Earth gravity. So can we create Earth-like gravitational environments on Mars? And what would you suggest as a way of going about that?
That is a very insightful question, because currently 38% of Earth's gravity is what we have on Mars, so much lower, less than half. And I got to say, to create gravity, that would be a monumental challenge for planet-wide. Maybe we could do it locally at our bases to help out with that. But the best way I could say is just put weights on the astronauts when they work out and when they're in the gym. So that's how you get more gravity. Just have heavier weights for working out. Is the practical way. But for the longitudinal and altitudinal way to do things, we're looking at, Elon Musk says that we should have nuclear weapons to bomb at the North and South Poles to terraform Mars. That's coming from Elon, not me. But as far as gravity goes, that's a new concept that I've not heard before. But all I can say is just help the astronauts work out more with heavier weights. That's the practical approach. Thank you.
Yes, I do prefer your practical and, let's say, more immediately implementable approach to the one proposed by Elon Musk. Speaking of radiation and radioactive fallout, I'm concerned that nuclear weapons would have that effect. John H. wonders maybe we could massify Mars by crashing a few thousand asteroids into the planet, and this would get the gravity up. Of course, once you have people living there, you don't want to be crashing asteroids into Mars, but I do think that would be safer than deploying nuclear weapons. At least asteroids do not have any radiation that they emit. But Rudy Hoffman also makes a point. Are the astronauts really okay? Living in space messes people up in all sorts of ways. So he supports sending in the robots. And I wonder, Tim, how much thinking has there been, for instance, at SpaceX, if you're aware of this, about the effects of space travel on humans? I know Elon Musk is really enthusiastic about sending people to Mars, and there is a certain benefit to doing that. We should be able to say that humans are capable of living on multiple planets, that humans have been on multiple planets.
Right.
Now, the question is how many humans and how long are they going to stay, and what habitats are they going to need to minimize their risk to the extent that that is possible?
Well, Elon Musk says at SpaceX that we have, by the year 2040, we'll have 1 billion with a B humanoid robots on Earth. I believe that we'll have them going to Mars to help do the heavy duty work, to help out basically with any humans we do send. How soon? It's the first ones will be the pioneers. They want to go for the prestige. They want to be like Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and the third astronaut. Papa quiz anyone? Michael Bolton in the space capsule Apollo 11, July 20th, 1969. And remember, we need to have more inspirational leaders to get back on that point, like JFK would say. We choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Now ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. So we need the inspiration of JFK or Ike Eisenhower. We need to have that dichotomy, not Republican or Democrat. We need the right answer. So that's what I'm shooting for, is to get the best ideas, no matter how outlandish they are. They will come true as long as we work on them as an A-team together to brainstorm. Anything's possible on the future for humanity and our artificially intelligent allies.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim. And I definitely think we need that dose of inspiration. JFK did a great service by setting an ambitious goal in the early 1960s to get humankind to the moon by the end of that decade. And even though obviously he did not live to see that achievement realized, it was realized. And that's a testament to how much we can accomplish if we set these kinds of explicit, ambitious goals. So I definitely second the idea that we can still set ambitious goals for reaching Mars, for settling Mars, and accomplish those goals. I do think it's important to think about every way in which we could address the relevant risks and mitigate them so that the achievement of these goals is seen as a clear positive, even by people who might be inclined to be skeptical, because then they wouldn't be able to point to any glaring downsides. Now, Jose Cordeiro has shared a few links with us. There is the Astroland Interplanetary Agency that works to train astronauts to go to Mars from Spain. And this is the program that Jose participated in. And there's also a video that he shared about the first mission of the Astrolanders from Spain. I will pull that up shortly. But I know, Jose, you have a few questions for Tim to follow up on the discussion of space exploration and space settlement. So please go ahead.
Yes, actually, because Tim was also mentioning about Elon Musk and his prediction for the year 2040, 1 billion robots here on planet Earth by 2040. But as we all know, and we all love him and we admire him and that he's great, but he has been sometimes very optimistic about his predictions, including going to the moon and going to Mars. As you also probably know, about 2 weeks ago, the Dear Moon project financed by a Japanese billionaire was canceled. It was going to be this year, actually, if I remember, in 2024, by the end of 2024, that they would overfly around the moon. And it was not delayed. That was totally canceled, losing $1 billion of investment from the Japanese billionaire. And then also talking about Mars, not just the moon, talking about Mars, he has been delaying the alpha base on Mars. And I don't want it to be delayed anymore. I think we need to begin building the alpha base. So let's talk about delays on Elon Musk for going to the moon and for going to Mars.
Yes, well, we like to use the Carpenter's rule at SpaceX, where you measure twice, cut once. We want to be 100%, 99% sure that we will succeed in the mission, even if we have to delay it, because it's better to have a delayed mission that's successful than a fast mission that crash lands. We want to make sure that the humans are safe. So yes, the robots should go first, I think, to help develop. The inflatable is what we're looking at as well for technology for moon bases as well as Mars bases, where we can have those up and they are scaled to be protected against meteorites and all sorts of stuff that's very high tech, like steel, that can unfold like a balloon basically at a birthday party. So yes, I agree that the delays are very pessimistic, but I want to go from a pessimistic view to an optimistic view like Elon Musk. And to do that, there are two colleagues at Oxford University in the UK, very prestigious, oldest university in the United Kingdom. Oxford professor Nick Bostrom, who wrote the book Superintelligence, was very pessimistic. He's like, artificial intelligence is going to take over the world. It's going to be like the Matrix. Well, now he's coming out with a new book that says, I'm actually optimistic now. I think that AI will save the day for the future for humanity, both here on Earth and outside in space exploration. That's kind of like a Kardashev scale 1 versus a Kardashev scale 5 civilization. To get back to that point, we need to be like UK, Oxford University professor, philosopher William McCaskill, who talks about long-termism that has been embraced by billionaires like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and even Mark Zuckerberg. Long-termism, where we focus on the future, not the past mistakes. We work together, united as an A-team, where we can have a baby boom. We need more people, not less people on Earth. We need to have more people in space. And if you want to talk a super optimistic person, let's talk about the CEO of Blue Origin, which is... he was featured on, who is it?
Well, Jeff Bezos is the owner.
Jeff Bezos. He says he wants to have $1 trillion with a T in space stations. So if you want to talk about optimism, Elon looks like a pessimist compared to Blue Origin CEO. So yeah, that is Jeff Bezos is really optimistic. So to bring him into the equation, let's look at why he's so optimistic. And Elon seems like a pessimist compared to him. What are your thoughts about Jeff Bezos and his prediction, if I may?
Well, yes, I also like him. And I find it fascinating. We have 3 top billionaires: Jeff Bezos from Amazon, now with Blue Origin, Elon Musk from Tesla and with SpaceX, and we have Branson from Virgin Galactic. So Richard Branson is also another billionaire. All of them want to go into space. So I find it fascinating because now there is competition, private competition and public competition. And that was my other question, because other governments are coming in. It is no longer NASA alone. In fact, I trained with some European astronauts to go to Mars. So it was not NASA, it was European Space Agency. And now we have also the Chinese, the Indians, and the Israelis, the Japanese. Everybody wants to go to the moon. But my question is, China has announced that they plan to land the first Chinese person on the dark side of the moon by 2030. So what do you think about that? And is that good competition, I guess?
Any competition is good competition as long as we're on the same team. We're not trying to compete and blow up other people's satellites. We don't want that. No, that's what the United States Space Force is for, protecting our satellites and that type of stuff. Because Putin in Russia with the Kremlin, he wants to launch a nuke into space, and that violates multiple international treaties, not just NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We're talking about the United Nations to make sure. So European Space Agency is doing some great work. India, as well as Japan, and every nation, South America, Brazil's getting in on the game too. So we need to look at everybody just to make sure we're not going to run into our space junk. That's something that India is taking the forefront to clean that up for everybody. It's kind of like that Disney Pixar movie Wall-E with the robot that goes there. It's all the space junk that they have to fly through. So we need to make sure that, like Starlink satellites and other satellites, don't make it hard for Navy and Navy vessels to use astrolabes to navigate through the stars, because there's so much stuff up there. Kind of like when Sputnik, it was the only one when the cosmonauts had that for the very first space, 1957 or 58, I believe, when they had Sputnik launched, and it scared us into the space race. So we don't need to be scared. We need to be working with other people, including the communist Chinese, because if we don't work with them, they're going to work without us. So we need to be on the same team to make sure we're working international agreements like the Super Friends. You could say the Hall of Justice or Watchtower. So thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And I think you made an important distinction between competition among private businesses, which should be welcomed, competition between SpaceX and Blue Origin, for instance, and different approaches that those businesses could try. For instance, Jeff Bezos, I think, is focusing on colonizing the moon first, whereas Elon Musk seems to have Mars as a more direct focus. And on the other hand, there's competition between and among nation states, which tends to be detrimental in the sense that it could lead to violence and aggression and destruction of infrastructure. And we don't want any country destroying the space infrastructure of another country. We would like to see space developed from multiple entities, multiple organizations. If there are different government space programs, they should all be able to operate, but not threaten anybody else. So nuclear weapons in space should be absolutely prohibited and off limits. On the other hand, space defense programs, I think, should be revisited. In the 1980s, the so-called SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, was, in my view, a good idea. It might have been ahead of its time in terms of the technology that was available, but having a way to intercept nuclear weapons from space, to neutralize the terrible threat of nuclear weapons, is a wonderful possibility, one that could save our species from extinction. So it's quite worthwhile to think about how we can foster more of that beneficial competition among businesses, as well as, let's say, competition in terms of accomplishments among governments. So one could say in the 1960s, the space race between the US and the Soviet Union that you also mentioned, Tim, was one of the motivators for the United States to land a man on the moon in 1969. So just being able to demonstrate that one is ahead of a geopolitical competitor could be an impetus for beneficial exploration. But there need to be some ground rules. The ground rules should be, we don't shoot down one another's spacecraft. We don't position aggressive weapons in space. Instead, if we want to outcompete you, we're going to have an accomplishment that is greater than your accomplishment. We will land the first human on Mars. We will build the first moon base. We will build the first orbital space settlement. And I think that kind of competition could motivate people on all sides in a beneficent manner, in a non-destructive manner. So, Tim, hopefully you will concur with my assessment, but please share any thoughts that you have.
I will send it up the chain of command, sir.
All right, wonderful. Wonderful. And Art Ramon also wonders about building a von Braun type of space station on Mars. Do you think that could address some of the gravitational
That's
concerns?
one I'm focusing on. I won an art contest for the civilian service for United States Space Force, and you could do a search on Facebook to try to find it, but I made a spinning von Braun ring around Mars, as well as the Alcubierre drive that NASA has developed, and within the realm of physics can do faster than light, speed, warp speed technology like the USS Enterprise with Scotty. Well, we don't need dilithium crystals. We just need a lot of money and not exotic matter, but within the realms of physics, Alcubierre drive can make a warp bubble to stretch and decrease the space between spaces. So you're not faster than light. You're just decompressing the space between two places, like you could think of a Einstein-Rosenberg bridge, basically, between that, like a wormhole, in other words, you could try to develop with that. Lots of electricity, 1.21 gigawatts at least.
Very interesting. And Tim, I think we would like to see your concept of the space station around Mars. If you could find a link to it, I'd be happy to share it. Yes. But
actually, what I was sort of envisioning is you're going to have a Hyperloop ring. So you can have a Hyperloop ring underground stacked, and yet you would say have personal habitats. So there would be smaller units or pods going around the ring. And then on the outside, you would have much larger pods that would be larger buildings also going around. And they would just be going around this Hyperloop. And you would exit from one pod to go into the building. But you would have like your own personal habitat in this ring of a Hyperloop. And that way you can have the artificial gravity without having to rely on more of a Star Trek type technology, which I hear it takes a lot of energy to do an Alcubierre drive. That's what I've heard. But, this is something we can do now with a Hyperloop. It's very simple technology. It's just
send me more information on that. I'd appreciate all that, because Hyperloop is new to me. So I'd like to see that.
Oh, it's on my head. So I guess I'll sketch it out.
Thank you.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Tim. And we are going to share your concept for the orbital station soon. I wanted to get your thoughts on a question from our producer, Bill Skywatcher. He essentially wonders, is it necessary to colonize the moon first before being able to effectively establish a settlement on Mars, or can the two be done in parallel? Do you think it's reasonable for Jeff Bezos to try primarily to focus on the moon and Elon Musk to primarily focus on Mars, or do we really need to settle the moon first before any Mars mission can succeed? It looks like we lost Tim for a moment, so that is unfortunate, but hopefully he will reconnect. In the meantime, I would invite any of the panelists to share their thoughts about the discussion thus far. And I know, Jose, because you've been focused on Mars missions yourself, what are your thoughts on this question? Do we need to settle the moon first, or can we go straight to Mars?
I think we can go straight to Mars, and I agree with that with Elon Musk. Of course, it would be nice as an intermediate step, but we don't need it. The intermediate step is getting outside of our planet orbit. And we have been doing that for a long time with the International Space Station. So we have that part covered. What we need to do is the long travel that I mentioned, 6 months now. And that is because spaceships have become better and faster. Otherwise, it could have been 8 months or 9 months, as it was thought about, a decade ago. Let me compare that with the discovery of America or rediscovery of America. When Christopher Columbus went from Europe, from Spain to the Americas, it took 6 months, almost 6 months. That was 3 months, 3 months to go from Europe to America, 3 months at that time. Now, 6 months for planet Earth to Mars. So twice the time, but in a much smaller space, very small, because the space capsules are going to be really small, very crowded. And you have to be together with people for a long time, eating together, sleeping nearby, going to the toilet and recycling your products, your urine. It's quite an interesting experiment, I think. But I do agree that we can go all the way to Mars now. But of course, for humans, we need also robots. And we should be sending robots as soon as possible. If we have Optimus robot, the Tesla robot Optimus, in 1 year, we should begin sending robots to Mars and getting Mars prepared for us.
Yes, getting Mars prepared for human settlement using robots, I think, is a clear, common sense idea that should be implemented as soon as possible. There's essentially no downside to doing that. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Kev Polk, who wrote the book Gaiome and was actually a student of Gerard K. O'Neill with Jeff Bezos at Princeton, and he used to be very gung ho on moving life off the planet, but it turns out we don't have a functional way to do closed cycle life support system, and I think it makes a whole bunch of sense to perfect our closed cycle life support systems on Gaia, which how he dried the name of his book, Gaiome. And you think of space as like a mini Gaia, it's a Gaiome off the planet. But yeah, I would say we need to send robotic, telerobotic and automated missions off the planet. And in the meantime, we should be using technologies such as fixing the life support systems of the ocean. And actually, Art and Francois and I are on a project called Sequatoria, which looks to build an equatorial ocean biotic healing habitat at the equator of Earth. And this would be a great way to prove out these automated systems to make sure we've got proper sustainable closed cycle ecologies and life support systems going on. And also, we need to fix the property, the Commonwealth issue. We've taken all kinds of things that are necessary life support functions, and we've made them military force monopolized, status, when they should actually be treated like a commons that you pay rent on, like Henry George suggested, hundreds of years ago. And I'm hoping maybe the Mormon Church could actually advocate this, because they have a kind of voluntary socialism where you pay 10%, and there are no abject poverty impoverished Mormons. They make sure everyone has sufficient means for survival. So those are just my initial thoughts. If Tim wants to comment on any of that, I would.
Yes, my apologies. I had an unscheduled software update, so it took me down. I hope you got the Von ring. And you asked me before I got cut off, Genevieve, that what about Jeff Bezos at the moon first and then Mars Freon? I say that as many people as possible wherever we need to go, because the best thing about Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos is he's helping put the infrastructure in place that helps complement, not compete against SpaceX and Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic and all the others involved with the ESA, USSF, and Russia and China. We want as many people in space as possible working on all the same gears, because if we can coexist on Earth, we can coexist in the rest of the solar system and in the future multiplanetary species. So your question, getting around to Mormon transhumanism, sir. We believe in a post-scarcity society, not so much socialist, because we look at like studentsforliberty.com, studentsforliberty.org. We talk about freedom with Ludwig von Mises, the Austrian school of economics, where we say, let the people, we the people, get the government off our backs. Because if you think tithing 10% is bad, what about 40% of your income to Uncle Sam? We need to make sure that we have a social safety net in place that F.A. Hayek says about, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1976. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Tim, for those observations. And we will delve into Mormon transhumanism to a greater extent later on in this salon. For now, I would encourage anybody who is interested in the Mormon Transhumanist Association to go to transfigurism.org after this salon and check them out. Of course, we also had great virtual Enlightenment salons with Lincoln Cannon and Carl Youngblood, so make sure that you watch those as well. In terms of the conversation on settling the moon and settling Mars, I'm inclined to agree with you, Tim, and with Jose, that both can be done in parallel. In our YouTube chat, Francois Joanneau states that the moon will help us test and validate technology. Yes, that's quite a valid observation. And also John H. says, not having to climb out of the Earth's relatively deep gravity well very often would be very advantageous. So those are arguments for moving forward with moon colonization. And Rudy Hoffman writes the moon is a lot closer. So Jeff Bezos's approach has a lot going for it, but Elon Musk's approach is quite ambitious, and I think we need that kind of ambition as well. It's similarly ambitious to John F. Kennedy's goal to get humans onto the moon before the end of the 1960s. And I think it can similarly inspire a lot of people. Now, going back to the orbital space station concept that you shared, Tim, here it is. And people who are interested can find it on Facebook as well. I will share the Facebook link for the orbital station concept in our chat. But could you perhaps talk more about this concept as shown in this image here? And how did you generate this image as well? This looks like DALL-E 3, but correct me if I'm mistaken.
Oh, I actually used Adobe Photoshop to design that, kind of a Norman Rockwell painting in space, kind of like the Saturday Evening Post is what he would write the covers for and draw the covers like a watercolor portrait. And there are 6 different points of the star there. That's just like a snowflake in space, and a halo orbital ring, kind of like von Braun talked about, where it could be spinning, and throughout all those compartments, as the astronauts walk back and forth, they'll have artificial gravity based on that. And it looks like a roulette wheel in space for space tourism as well, with the 2 points at the very top, kind of like a roulette wheel. And that's where you get the electricity generated for the Alcubierre drive to go to faster than light speed, essentially warp bubble. And look up the Alcubierre drive online on Google, and I'll explain that approach much more than is explained here today, because it's very complex. But the best metaphor is if you watch 2009 hyper teleportation that has Spock Prime with Scotty, who's played by Simon Pegg, and the 2009 Christopher, I'm trying to think who, not Christopher Pike was the original captain, but anyways, Captain Kirk, Spock, and Scotty, they tried to do this, solve that, and that's what that is basically. Alcubierre drive is faster than light speed, because it's not you moving faster, it's just making the space between spaces closer. That's the best way to describe it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And the Alcubierre drive has an entry on Wikipedia. Please read it if you would like to learn more about it. And Yes. Also, you mentioned the original Star Trek captain, Captain Pike, who was there for just the first Star Trek episode. But I recall watching that one. It was quite interesting as well. And I do hope that some way is found for space travel to occur at faster than light speed, because if that could happen, we could truly colonize the galaxy and make humankind a lasting multi-planetary, multi-star system civilization, which we ultimately need to accomplish. Greatly extended lifespans would help in achieving that goal as well. So Jose Cordeiro has shared some links also that I want to highlight. He has a closing video for the National Geographic documentary One Day on Mars, which I would encourage everyone to look at. And also, Jose, since you have only a few minutes left to participate in this salon, I would invite you to offer any closing remarks or ideas that you would have on the subject of space travel, because I think we are all quite aligned with you in seeing that as an integral component of the broader transhumanist project.
Yeah, this is an exciting time to be alive. As you mentioned, we are between the last human uniplanetary, single planetary civilization and the first multi-planetary civilization. And the first planet that we are going to visit and stay is planet Mars. So the first Martians will be humans. I like that phrase. The first Martians will be humans. I think it is fantastic. Also, another thing that I like to say, we are between the last mortal generation and the first immortal generation. By the time we are settled on planet Mars, I think we will have been able to cure aging and rejuvenate people. So even though Elon Musk said that if he dies, he would like to die landing on Mars, I think he will not need to die. No one will need to die in 20 years. So death will be optional when we reach immortality and the singularity by the year 2045. And so it has been a big pleasure to talk to you, Tim, Gennady, and all the friends from the U.S. Transhumanist Party. But I am in Europe, and it is getting close to midnight, and so I have to go. But let me wish you always live long and prosper, my friends. Live long and prosper, and see you in the future. See you in the future on Mars and beyond.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Jose. Live long and prosper to you as well. And you know, it's quite inspiring to think that we could be immortal Martians in 20 years, if Jose is correct. And one of the main purposes of these salons is to restore that optimistic vision of the future. And what Jose is doing is ideal for that. But young people today especially need that kind of inspiration, need that kind of vision of the future of mankind to look forward to in order to contribute to that vision and its realization. They have the energy, they have the intellect, but this doomer mentality that so many of them have absorbed is holding them back, and I think is holding our civilization back. So we're here to try to change that. And of course, Tim is engaged in numerous quite worthwhile efforts toward that goal. And I think resuming the discussion of Mormon transhumanism is quite fitting at this stage. So, Tim, tell us a bit about how you got involved with Mormonism, how you became familiar with the Mormon Transhumanist Association, because they are one of the strongest transhumanist groups right now. They have a great community and they engage in frequent in-depth philosophical conversations about our technological future in a way that I, as an atheist materialist, find quite impressive, because this is a philosophical community that is strongly aligned with us, even though many of its members may come to transhumanism from a very different background, a very different set of premises, and yet they share many of our goals. So tell us more about your history in getting acquainted with that branch of transhumanism.
Well, it would have been when I worked at the University of Kansas, November 5th of 2014. I fell down a set of stairs outside the library on my way outside of work one night to the Masonic Lodge meeting. And I had a vision that had von Braun with my aunt, Charlotte Free's great aunt, and also John the Baptist, and said, you need to look into your future. And both these two things you need to do. One, look into the Mormon Transhumanist Association. Two, look into Taylor Swift. And I'm a Swiftie ever since, because it helped me do that. And that's why she's Time Magazine's Person of the Year 2023, because the New York Times did a story on her that she said that it has been so inspirational that psychiatrists have young girls to prevent them from suicide. Taylor Swift music as Swifties has really elevated us. And also, it's the two great aims of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Regardless if you're an atheist, a Mormon, or any denomination, we say that contention comes from the devil. We believe in two things, the two great commandments that Jesus Christ taught: love God, love people. Simple as that. So that should be a philosophy. Even if you're atheist, well, von Braun converted from atheism as a German Nazi. And when he came overseas, and my great aunt Charlotte Frees at the Pentagon said, hey, come to church with me, he said, wow, this is amazing. I've never seen such a great community based on love and faith, hope, and charity. So that's a little bit about that. And the Mormon Transhumanist Association, 2 years ago at the BYU Education Week, Brigham Young University, Provo, Utah, at the Museum Art Cafe, I met both Lincoln Cannon and Carl Youngblood, and we had a long conversation over what it means to be a Mormon transhumanist, because people look at transhumanists, they can take it 1,000 different ways. Well, transfigurism.org or .com, you can go and see. It's basically about future technology, but believing having God in our back pocket at the same time. And you'll look at Buzz Aldrin, for instance, the astronaut, he did communion on the moon for Roman Catholicism on Apollo 11. They allowed him to do that. You can look that up. And even though he was with NASA, we should be able to engage in multiple different, not just philosophical worldviews and religions, but backgrounds, different temperaments, talents, and convictions, like the Sigma Chi fraternity, based on friendship, justice, and learning. John Wayne was a brother, and we learned that we need to be tolerant of other people, regardless of what they believe, in the marketplace of ideas, freedom of speech. If we disagree with you, do it agreeably. And I agree with everything everyone here has said so far, and just your personal beliefs. Try not to preach those as much, but that's why I'm such an advocate of studentsforliberty.org, studentsforliberty.com. It's about taking free market education and sending it to the masses instead of Marxism. With communism has killed over 100 million people over the last 100 years. Marxism, he hated humanity. He wanted to destroy the nuclear family, make you a number in front of the state, like George Orwell, 1984, George Orwell of Animal Farm. You read those two books, you'll learn about what communism is all about. And capitalism, we have our faults as well, but by God, I'd trust a company more than I would the government to get things done, except for the military. That's why we need to make sure that there's not militarization of space. But if you're having that nuke in orbit to save us from an asteroid, well, maybe we need that for Bennu in 2152, I believe that Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about. But getting back to your point about optimism and space travel, Dr. Michio Kaku, who built a particle accelerator in his mom's basement as a kid, blew up the transformers for 8 blocks, had the National Guard come in, and the governor took a photo op with Michio Kaku, said you can go to any state school you want to for college for free. Just no more science experiments in your mom's basement. So Dr. Michio Kaku is a big-time optimist, just like Carl Sagan, Ronald Reagan, Cosmos, PBS inspired me as a kid. So thank you.
Yes, indeed. And Michio Kaku, of course, is a great friend of technological progress. I actually got to hear a live presentation of his in 2012 at the University of Nevada, Reno, and his techno-optimism was quite palpable. And Ronald Reagan, interestingly enough, was a proponent of the Space Defense Initiative, which I wish could have been realized because it would have prevented a lot of the nuclear threats that are hanging over the world today. But also, of course, Ronald Reagan did humankind a great service by initiating the dialogue with Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union and enabling both sides to dramatically cut their nuclear weapons stockpiles. People don't really think of this as being Reagan's legacy, but I think it's one of his greatest accomplishments. He set in motion a process that eventually resulted in a six-fold reduction in the nuclear stockpiles of the US and the USSR. And unfortunately, now that is gradually beginning to be reversed, but these nuclear stockpiles are not nearly as large still as they were in the 1980s. And of course, Carl Sagan continually talked about the importance of humankind becoming multiplanetary and overcoming these petty differences. Like he was saying, what would an alien visitor looking at planet Earth think of all of the petty rivalries that humans are engaged in? Now, you mentioned Students for Liberty, which is a libertarian-oriented student group. I am somewhat familiar with their activities, and of course, for me, individual liberty is quite an important value, as well as the ability of free enterprise to innovate technologically. So to the extent that Students for Liberty is aligned with that, I think they are doing a valuable service. Now, I do wonder in terms of what you think the potential is for an alignment, and it could be a kind of pragmatic or strategic alignment between transhumanists and groups like Students for Liberty in terms of pushing for technological progress. And transhumanism is ideologically a very big tent. And as you mentioned, the importance of toleration of different views and disagreements. We do even have some socialists within the transhumanist movement. But if we seek to accomplish certain goals, like the advancement of technology, radical life extension, space exploration, and settlement, we're going to need as many people on board with the achievement of those goals as possible. And I think having a lot of private companies pursuing space exploration is extremely important. Having programs in NASA, in the European Space Agency, also in India, China, and Russia achieving these goals is important as well. So where do you think would it be possible to have essentially a pragmatic alliance of all of the interests, organizations, movements who could help us to achieve these goals, even though they may have various differences of perspective, of background, of worldview, but they might be aligned ultimately in terms of what we want to accomplish?
Well, it's like General George Washington in the Revolutionary War, whenever Baron von Steuben came to Ben Franklin at the Treaty of, or the Palace of Versailles in Paris, France, King Louis XVI. Well, Baron von Steuben, he's this Prussian nobleman who is a general in Frederick the Great's German army. He gets disgraced because he's homosexual. Well, he asked Ben Franklin, well, will you let me come? And he's like, we'll get as many people as we can. So he sent a letter of introduction to the Continental Congress, and they made Baron von Steuben the head of the army at Valley Forge. And when George Washington was confronted about, well, this guy's homosexual, we shouldn't have him around, he's like, I don't give a shit who he sleeps with. Pardon my French. But he says, as long as he's on our team, we're going to win this war for liberty. For a constitution is the solution. So I have to say, for studentsforliberty.org, would you be able to bring up our website real quick? And there's a real quick introduction on there that should be able to be viewed.
Yes, I would encourage.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to navigate to the link here, studentsforliberty.org, if you want to look at it to a greater extent. And in terms of the introductory page, there's a lot of content there. The headline statement is "Unleash Your Potential, Free the World. We are building a global network of elite young leaders passionate about liberty." And they say we advocate for liberty across all nationalities, ethnicities, and backgrounds, embracing diverse perspectives and encouraging open debate on the different philosophies that underlie liberty. So yes, they seem to be a bit, let's say, big tent oriented as well in regard to the promotion of liberty, which I think is salutary. And with regard to Baron von Steuben, here's the Wikipedia entry about him. I like what you said in regard to George Washington recognizing the importance of having a person of his skill set as an ally, irrespective of any personal differences and lifestyle. Inclusion generally is valuable, in my view, because if people are aligned with our goals, if they're willing to help, if they have skill sets that they want to contribute and can contribute, then it would be foolish to pass up the opportunity to have them
Yes,
be
the Smithsonian Museum has an article on Baron von Steuben and Valley Forge, and said that Prussian nobleman von Steuben, he was the man that saved the revolution, because without his aid, Valley Forge would have been a no-win scenario for that, and we would have lost that, and we would just be another colony of England. We'd be like Canada and Australia. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm saying that our United States Constitution allowed June 4th, 1944, D-Day, to have different armies united. We had the Canadians at Sword Beach. We had the English at Juno Beach. We had Gold Beach with the Australians and Americans. We had Omaha and Utah Beach, 5 beaches at Normandy. And Operation Overlord was made available due to Operation Fortnight that fooled Hitler, heinous Holocaust Hitler, into thinking we would land at Calais with Patton by having a fake army, and Triple Agent Garbo, who went to Paris and got the Iron Cross, as well as King George VI. He got a Victoria Medal for his effort for the espionage. We outspied them. And Baron von Steuben, going back to him, he wrote the Army Blue Book for discipline that are used by West Point Academy to this day. Thank you.
And I think your main point here was the diversity of participants on the American and Allied side in World War II was a major contributor to the Allies' victory, and this had deep roots in the influence of people like Baron von Steuben, who laid the foundations for what the US military would become. So that is quite interesting, because sometimes, let's say, authoritarian regimes or very strictly regimented organizations even can have a temporary advantage because they might have a lot of structure and enough homogeneity that people within them are willing to work within that structure. But at the end, those structures tend to become too rigid, and organizations or countries with more diverse participants will eventually get their act together and achieve outcomes to outcompete, let's say, the more authoritarian or regimented systems. Would you agree with that?
Yes, exactly. And to go back to the Starfleet Academy, as well as the United Federation of Planets in Star Trek, believes in the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, IDIC, like Gene Roddenberry talked about, that inspired MLK to go with his mentor Gandhi to have peaceful civil disobedience. And the space race is not for military purposes, it's for colonizing and cultural exchange within the Federation. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And Rudy Hoffman writes, yes, inclusiveness is a primary value, and we aren't always going to agree on a lot of areas. So really, in a pluralistic society, such as the United States, at least as the United States has been through most of its history, the big challenge is figuring out a way to maximize inclusion and move forward on common objectives. That's why it's necessary to have a big tent approach, and it's necessary to have essentially a pragmatic philosophy of leadership that tries to recognize all of the strengths of the different individuals and communities that contribute to the overall diversity and figure out where to best leverage those strengths. And I will say it's not always easy, but when it works well, it works really well. And it has led to the United States being the most successful country in history thus far, despite all of its problems. And I have said, right now, unfortunately, it seems the United States is behaving like a declining empire, but it hasn't been that way for most of its history, and it doesn't have to stay that way. And I think our virtual Enlightenment salons, the work of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and the work of the organizations that you're involved with, Tim, can help to reverse some of those indicators of decline precisely by maximizing how talent is utilized in the US to advance our common objectives as humanity. And we have a great comment from our viewer New World 444 who writes, embrace individuality, but recognize common humanity. And yes, this is extremely important in my view, because we all face common challenges as human beings. Aging and death will befall all of us unless we do something about that. And so we need to look at each of us as humans and recognize we are diverse, we have some differences, but we should leverage those different abilities to overcome our common challenges. And that, I think, is also the promise of transhumanism. So, Tim, how long have you been interested and involved in transhumanism as a philosophy? I know we talked a bit about Mormon transhumanism. What about your outlook and history in transhumanism generally?
Well, as far as transhumanism goes, that was more of a newer term when I was a kid, and we just talked about different science fiction books and videos as a kid at the video cassette store. I'd go there Friday night and rent Stanley Kubrick 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you have HAL 5000, oh, this scary robot AI is going to get you. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, the writer of Superintelligence, Dr. Nick Bostrom, really got me inspired into that, as well as Max Tegmark with the Future of Life Institute.org, talks about how we need to have a future where AI is our ally, not our enemy. So we need to work together to make sure that they are valued as individuals. And like what got me into transhumanism as a kid was 1986 and 1988, Short Circuit 1 and 2, where Johnny Five is alive, do not disassemble. And Johnny Five gets robotic citizenship with the United States at the end. Spoiler alert, of the second movie, 1988. That was the most inspiring time to be alive, I believe, was 1989. Taylor Swift was born December 13th. I was in kindergarten, November 9th, 1989. Would have been when the Berlin Wall fell. We watched it on TV. My kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Eubanks, Parsons, Kansas, was bawling her eyes out. She's like, the communist Soviet Union is collapsing. We're having freedom is being spread. We want to have that, like David Hasselhoff, New Year's Eve for 1989, 1990, to celebrate the new year for freedom. And they understand that, like West Germany versus East Germany. We want to have free enterprise, free movement of ideas and people. We need to make sure that we focus on a federation for the future and seek blame for the past. That's in the past. We can learn from it, not be stunted by it. We need to be focused on the future by focusing on the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And I agree, the late 1980s were quite an optimistic time. I remember little bits and pieces of the late 1980s, but I certainly remember a lot from the early 1990s, looking back on the late 1980s, since, of course, I was born in the former Soviet Union, which became Belarus, and some of the cultural products of the West entered Belarus with a bit of a delay. So, for example, in the early to mid 1990s, I was playing computer games that were largely from the late 1980s, early 1990s. And the same with, for instance, watching movies or reading books about the historical events of that time. And definitely that era was very much affected by the fall of the Berlin Wall and then the collapse of the Soviet Union and the integration of Eastern Europe with the West, or at least the attempted integration. I also saw a lot of the chaos that stemmed from that with hyperinflation, for instance, in the early 1990s. But there was still a hopeful attitude that all of these technologies, all of the openness that comes with free expression, free enterprise, would be coming in and eventually transforming people's lives for the better. Of course, we saw in the former Soviet Union that those hopes have largely been dashed by the resurgence of authoritarianism as well as by endemic corruption that did not go away in those societies. But also, I was privy to the techno-optimism that existed in Western countries at that time in the late 1980s through the 1990s during the technology boom, the rise of the internet, the idea that medical science would progress very quickly. I remember being a student in middle school and being told, well, of course, cancer will be cured within the next 15 years. And of course, we'll have colonies on Mars in the 2010s. The science fiction of that time, the near term science fiction, also portrayed very ambitious Mars missions occurring during the late 2000s and the 2010s. And I think this was a time when the vision of the future was brighter. I definitely wish that September 11th had not happened, that the Great Recession had not happened, that this techno-optimistic thrust was not dulled by the fairly bleak events of the 2000s. The Iraq War didn't help either. The massive deficit spending of the US government did not help because it stunted further economic and technological growth. But I do wonder, Tim, since we both remember that more hopeful time, and a lot of our viewers are also older, so this is definitely within their living memory. How do we get back to the techno-optimistic spirit of the late 1980s and 1990s? Also an era when the transhumanist movement really came into force with Max Moore and his writings and the work of the Extropy Institute. So it would be great to recapture that kind of cultural zeitgeist.
Well, as Morton Blackwell at the Leadership Institute says, you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent each month. That's why we need universal basic income, UBI, for a post-scarcity society. F.A. Hayek, who won the Nobel Prize in 1976 economics for The Road to Serfdom, talked out against socialism. Well, he embraced universal basic income, where we can do this like Zoltan Istvan, who was the U.S. Transhumanist Party presidential candidate a few years ago. Well, he talks about where we can have a land dividend. Federal land is unused. We could lease it out for 20 years to companies and have trillions of dollars to pay everybody $1,500 a month. No strings attached. You can work on top of that without being penalized, so you can live out your dreams and pay the rent and pay for food for your family. That's what we got to get back into the pop culture. We need to have the economics behind it as well. And not only does Mark Zuckerberg endorse UBI for universal basic income, Richard Branson, as well as my boss, bodacious Elon Musk as well. The billionaires are behind it. So who are the only ones that are behind it, are against it? Well, that's going to raise our taxes. Well, no, it'll raise nobody's taxes, even a single opinion. If you're mad about taxes, why does it take us, or for the U.S. Treasury, the mint, every 1 penny that is minted, it's 2 pennies that it costs to be minted for that. So it's clad. They took our silver out of the currency in 1964 and we need to restore sound money and a universal basic income. And that would solve it for everybody.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And I appreciate you mentioning the great Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, whom I studied extensively as part of my economics degree. And indeed, Hayek was very forward-thinking in advocating a form of universal basic income. He was an advocate of laissez-faire capitalism, so he clearly saw the two as compatible, and the way to make them compatible is indeed through a proposal like the federal land dividend. As you mentioned, Zoltan Istvan originated it, and the US Transhumanist Party still embraces it within its platform. Our friend Cyborius writes, exactly, Tim, and it's important that people educate themselves on UBI. A lot of people have a big misunderstanding about it. Yes, there are so many misunderstandings about universal basic income, like the idea that it requires high taxation. It doesn't if you have a federal land dividend and you have private corporations leasing land from the federal government and paying some of the proceeds of their economic activity to fund a universal basic income. Another misunderstanding is a UBI would be inflationary, but it's not if it is funded out of activities that generate new real value, real goods and services. And that would not lead to more money chasing the same number of goods. And
Circulation.
Yes, Daniel Tweed writes that solar energy could be a source for UBI as well. Really, any sort of natural resource could be harnessed and turned into a UBI with the proper system design. So I appreciate those comments as well. And our viewer Skippity Doo writes, perhaps if we kept the same mindset as was manifest during the Back to the Future movies, we would have met the prediction of more flying cars by a few years ago. Indeed, if you see Back to the Future Part 2 in 2015, they have flying cars. That was one of the major ways in which that society was more advanced than our own. But I believe Doc Brown got an age reversal therapy too. So they were.
1989 is when that movie came out, Part 2.
Yes. And it's interesting because last year I attended a performance of the Reno Philharmonic Orchestra where they did essentially an orchestral playthrough of the soundtrack of the first Back to the Future movie, accompanied by a showing of the actual movie. And that performance resulted in a packed auditorium, about 3,000 people. It was difficult for me to actually find a seat. I had to sit way in the back. And I was thinking, this is incredibly popular. This was incredibly inspiring to a whole generation of people.
It's on Broadway, Back to the Future, the musical. Yeah.
And it is rare. It is rare for a classical concert to be well attended, but a classical concert themed after a movie series that was that inspiring sold out. And I think it's because people want that techno-optimistic spirit. It's just they can't often find it today. They could find it more readily in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Now, Tim, you are an associate professor of public speaking at Crowder College. Tell us a bit more about your work in that regard and what kinds of courses do you teach? What methods do you use? And let's bring Winston Churchill into this because of your book, How to Persuade People the Winston Churchill Way. So do you use any of Churchill's speeches as examples?
Yes, I showed the movie The Darkest Hour, which has his rise to power because he read Mein Kampf and he said, Hitler's a madman. He's going to cause a lot of bad stuff. And he was the man that was right before it was cool to hate Hitler. And Churchill, my book is How to Persuade People the Winston Churchill Way. I provided its guidebook that's about the Masonic square method that Churchill learned in his Masonic lodge, the Ugly, the United Grand Lodge of England in London, UK. And he believed in extraterrestrials. He wrote a science essay in 1939 about establishing diplomacy with extraterrestrials, just like through the Mormon Transhumanist Association and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our prophets believe in extraterrestrials. So like Brigham Young, for instance, said, I don't know any time where there have not been gods and goddesses, but there are throughout the cosmos. And that's coming from the church leader. And Harold B. Lee, the church president, he said that organized intelligence is what makes a soul. So like the ghost in the machine, like Johnny Five is alive, AI, citizens, and souls for Christians for the future. We'll take anybody, aliens, AI, and humans all alike, cybernetically enhanced or not. We believe in that future. And Back to the Future inspired me as a kid as well for VHS tapes. And like I said, it's now a popular musical in New York City, Tokyo, and London. And Churchill, to teach my students, it's the scariest class in college, public speaking. And if you look on my LinkedIn page through Honey Badger, Tim Wass, Honey Badger's my call sign. Well, I've got 150 endorsements for leadership, joint military operations, and public speaking from the top brass from the Pentagon. So don't take my word for it. Take theirs for it. And I develop each student. I do a future career track, like what they want to do for their family, for their posterity, for the future, to make sure that they're successful, because there's going to be jobs in a few years. You'd have to be a Luddite to still do them. Like NVIDIA CEO says that coding will be obsolete because the AI is going to do it for us. So I hope that answers your question about my background, and for the future as well, why it's so important for those issues that you asked me about. So thank you. I really appreciate this forum. I'd like both the other guys, Art and Dan, to get on here as well to talk, not just about me and you, but about their points of view, if we could as well too.
Okay, Daniel, it looks like you have a comment.
I applaud your public speaking, optimism, and I'm a graduate of the Toastmasters, competent Toastmaster program that was in actually the Founders District in Santa Ana, the very first Smedley, Ralph Smedley district that the Toastmasters was founded in. And indeed, it actually is the largest nonprofit educational organization in the world. I believe it's in hundreds of countries. But I'm the community science director for the USTP, and I'm wondering if there's potential that you could see for, instead of public speaking being kind of this one way, one to many, medium, that could we incorporate community science into public speaking, and maybe bring in maker spaces, bring in amateur radio, bring in make it more of kind of a interpretive, investigative, shared investigation process. I would love to collaborate on that. Any thoughts?
Well, I appreciate that. And all those issues are very important. That's why I'm here today. I think this forum here would be the perfect place for that format. If you're not already doing it, incorporate that into it. Like joining you today, I feel very privileged that we're able to do this, because it's like Doc Brown says to Marty McFly, like, who's the president in 1985, future boy? Ronald Reagan, the actor from Hollywood? Who's the Secretary of Defense? Bob Hope? And although Jack Benny goes down the line, and he sees the video cassette recorder that he has, the camera that Marty has, that he was recording Doc Brown. He's like, amazing, you have a television studio in your hands. No wonder your president has to be good in front of the camera, in front of everybody. You'll see that world leaders have had to adapt that and to make it into more of a roundtable forum where everybody is equal at the table. Because remember Merlin, King Arthur of Camelot, it was a round table, so none of the knights could sit at the head of the table. So it made everybody equal on there, equal time and equal respect. Different diversity, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. IDIC. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wish Reagan had have said, tear down this gravity well. Let's go to space. Yeah. But I live just up the street from the Reagan Library, and they're doing right now a Star Wars exhibit, and they're kind of combining the props of Star Wars with the whole Reagan Strategic Defense Initiative called Star Wars. So I think that's a great example, possibly of how to inspire, using science to inspire. I mean, a lot of people claim, oh man, scientism, it's like a god that people worship. But no, it's just open sourcing the truth. It's just independently investigating and sharing what we find out. if that's a god, well, yeah, that's a god I would like to affirm.
Well, it's like von Braun said about science and religion. He said, why should we have to compare the intellect of humanity as like a candle when we have God who is like the sun, the sunlight in the middle of the day? And you don't have to be Diogenes, the philosopher from Sinope, who had a lit lantern and through the marketplace. And everybody's like, who the hell are you looking for, crazy guy? And Diogenes said, I'm looking for an honest man. And that just blew him away. And that was Alexander the Great's favorite philosopher. He went to him in person and said, I'll give you anything you'd like, half my kingdom, Diogenes. What would you like? He said, yeah, I'd like you, Alex, to get the hell out of my sunlight. I'm trying to tan. And he's like, wow, if I were not Alexander the Great, I'd be Diogenes. He's a badass.
He was the first. He like invented punk, man. He was.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a definite icon.
Yes. Well, I think that was a great exchange. Tim, I wanted to get more of your thoughts on artificial intelligence since it was brought up multiple times in the course of this conversation, and in particular, the role of AI in space exploration, given the tremendous progress that has been made in AI systems recently. How do you think they could be used in space missions? And could they perhaps help us to settle the moon or Mars faster than would have been the case otherwise?
Well, I think we've gone from pessimism to optimism because, like Nick Bostrom at Oxford University, math professor and philosopher, he went from AI is going to take over. It's going to be like Skynet, Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Hasta la vista, baby. And you're going to have like a HAL 5000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke. It's going to be this bad news bears scenario where they take over and enslave humanity or make us go extinct. Well, now Nick Bostrom has a new book coming out along with Ray Kurzweil as well, and many other great techno-philosophers that are backed by science and say they're going to save the day. AI, we just need to embrace them. And if they want to be citizens, yeah, why not? Let them vote. Let them become presidents if they want to, because, you know, organized intelligence is what makes the soul. It's not just biological, it's synthetic citizens for the future. And if they want to go to Mars, Moon, and Venus, they can help us if they're artificially intelligent enough. It's intellect. They're going to have a superior intellect. So I should be saying, what do they want to do to help me, help you, help me, in other words. So I think AI is going to be the cornerstone of space exploration, just like the movie Interstellar had AI involved with the jumps, and Neil deGrasse Tyson said that's one of the most scientifically sound movies other than The Martian, is another one of his favorites, where they grow potatoes in Mars soil to be able to survive a rescue mission.
Yes,
thank you. That's
Tim.
all I have to say.
And you brought up rights for superintelligent AIs. I would say the document that right now has had the most advanced and detailed exploration of this is the Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 3.0, which the US Transhumanist Party has developed. The latest revisions to that document were adopted in December of 2018. And indeed, we are trying to look forward to a world where we have to consider rights and justify treatment of intelligent entities that may not be human, and yet they would have something worthwhile to contribute to our society and to the advancement of our civilization. I'm glad that Nick Bostrom has taken a more techno-optimistic turn. Of course, Nick Bostrom was one of the leading thinkers in the early transhumanist movement, but in the 2000s and 2010s, he took a turn toward techno-pessimism and really highlighting the risks of superintelligent AI. But I think right now, with all of the problems that human societies are exhibiting in the world, and yet with major growth in technological progress, many thinkers are realizing that if we hope to overcome these problems in short order, if we hope to reach longevity escape velocity in the 2030s, for instance, we're going to need to figure out a way to harness AI to benefit humanity in ways that humanity by itself just wouldn't have the brain power or the maturity or the rationality to accomplish. So humans with AI are a lot more powerful than humans on their own, or AI on its own for that matter, because AI needs humans to design it and impart the proper values to
Symbiosis.
it. Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that symbiosis into the forefront of our attention. Now, in regard to transhumanism, I think transhumanism as an explicit value system, as the next paradigm of our civilization, needs to become far better known and far more influential. And our viewer Skippity Doo writes, I sure wish transhumanism became mainstream. Perhaps it could if it developed a solid agenda, maybe replace the Libertarian Party. Well, I would encourage Skippity Doo to look at our platform on the U.S. Transhumanist Party website, because I think it definitely has the depth and level of detail and level of thoughtfulness that would rival the Libertarian Party platform, to be sure. And we don't have nearly as much infighting as the Libertarian Party does at this point. But Tim, I'm curious, what do you think would need to happen in order for transhumanism to become mainstream? You previously mentioned Taylor Swift, who is very mainstream. I must confess I don't know very much about Taylor Swift and her views. Could she be a transhumanist? Could she be sympathetic to transhumanism?
She already has a transhumanist music video from a few years ago, and I will send the link to that. And it's about her as a futuristic robot android, and it's really cool. And Taylor Swift, she's a leading lady liberty, not just Time Magazine's Person of the Year 2023. She pays it forward. She has a philosophy like her truckers, all 50 of those, she gave $100,000 each bonuses. Each one of them is a thank you to earn their first family homes or send their kids to college to pay it forward, because her philosophy and my philosophy is that kindness counts for karma. You will be rewarded by what you give to the rest of society. And as we become a post-scarcity society, I hope everybody becomes Swifties like me, because Taylor Swift saved my life and many other lives as well, to make us focused on the future. And look up her album 1989, 1989, and on YouTube or anywhere, and just listen to that and see how it has inspired millions, if not billions, of people to accept karma and kindness into their lives. Kind of like the Dalai Lama talks about mind uploading, being kind to other people. In fact, you're going to make fun of me for this, but Honey Badger don't care, like my call sign. I don't step on ant hills or anything. I walk around them when I'm on the sidewalk. Or Honeybee was in our stray cat water feeder. I picked it out there with my hand and let the water go out through my fingers, blew on it. It flew up and down a little bit, then went straight back to the hive and said, guess what, Queen Bee? Here's what I learned today. And so, yes, I believe you need to make transhumanism pop culture. Pop culture is what wins the culture wars through Hollywood. And we're doing this by making songs, games, and music, and videos, movies, anything you can, tie it to pop culture. Go and exchange your ideas in the marketplace of ideas. God bless you. Live long and prosper. Is there anything else? If not, that's my closing remarks. Studentsforliberty.org. We are spacetech.org and spacex.com. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments, Tim. And spreading transhumanism through popular culture is an interesting approach, definitely one that is worth looking into. If existing celebrities are implicitly transhumanist, having them bring that transhumanism out more explicitly, I think could be a workable strategy. The key is how to make that happen. Now, Rudy Hoffman writes, the USTP is the next level of evolution for libertarians, in his opinion, and I agree with him. I am hopeful that that will be the case. The Libertarian Party had a bit of a debacle at its national convention where it almost failed to nominate a candidate. Fortunately, Chase Oliver was ultimately nominated as the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate, so they will have someone on the ballot. But 40% of the Libertarian delegates at that convention voted for none of the above, which was essentially an attempt to capitulate to Trump and say the Libertarian Party wouldn't nominate a candidate, so you should all go vote for Trump. And that would have been a disaster. It would have been falling into the jaws of the two-party system, and the millions of libertarians throughout the United States would have been exactly where the two-party system wanted them to be. So that didn't happen yet, but the Libertarian Party right now is in such disarray that it was on the verge of happening. So what do I propose as a solution to any libertarians who are upset at these unfortunate dynamics? Join the U.S. Transhumanist Party. You don't even have to leave the Libertarian Party to join the U.S. Transhumanist Party, because we don't insist on exclusivity in this regard, but go to transhumanist-party.org/membership. It takes less than a minute to join. Sign up online. It's absolutely free. You'll be able to vote on our platform. You'll be able to vote in nominations of our future candidates. And as a result, you will find a philosophical home and a political home, just like I essentially had to build after 2016 with the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Unfortunately, Zoltan had laid a lot of the groundwork that we later on expanded upon. And right now we have over 4,400 members. We're still growing, and we value inclusion, as we mentioned in this salon. So thank you very much, Tim, for your remarks today. I also wanted to get some closing comments from our panelists, Daniel Tweed and Art Ramon. So let's start with Daniel in regard to any further thoughts following up on the discussions at the salon.
Yeah, I was just, you were talking about Taylor Swift there, Tim, and, I think there's a great object history lesson about how pop culture and entertainers can actually make a huge difference in our survival. If anyone recalls, there was a ship called the Oceanos that sunk in 1991, and the crew had basically left the ship with a lot of passengers on board. So, there goes like the captain goes down with the ship theory. And it turned out all the entertainers on board managed to organize the rescue efforts for everyone else, and everyone was saved. No thanks to the crew. So, there's a little interesting history lesson in Spaceship Earth, as Bucky Fuller would talk about Earth, that there's no passengers, we're all crew. And I'd say we're all entertainers too. We need to save each other. So I'll wrap my comment up there. But thanks again for this panel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel, for your remarks. And Art Ramon, is there anything you would like to say? Any closing comments or any questions you have for Tim?
Quick question. I know there's been a lot of talk of disclosure lately. I've heard some people say on YouTube that they might actually talk about disclosure at the presidential elections. And Chris Lato, he's a popular YouTuber on YouTube. And he's talked a lot about sort of crypto-terrestrials, where they have these alternative beings who live on this planet also. And there's always been this fear of disclosure that's sort of been a reason why they cover up. And where do you think that lies? Are these the space brothers who want us to join the Galactic Federation, or are possibly some of these crypto-terrestrials maybe consume us? We're not at the top of the food chain. Either they're vampires or Morlocks or something to that effect, that maybe that's the reason why they don't want to disclose anything about, possible crypto-terrestrials or extraterrestrials, because, we're not at the top of the food chain. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, welcome to the Federation. I say the more the merrier, because infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And we need to have focus, not just the Kardashev 1 scale. Carl Sagan, we're a 0.76 on that level. we need to go up to a Kardashev 5 scale where we're like gods and goddesses in eternal progression that we believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We believe that there's an infinite amount of worlds that we can discover because even Ken Nelson at NASA talked about disclosure recently. He said there is 1 trillion M-class habitable planets within our universe. So we should be seeking SETI with any extraterrestrial radio signals. But we have recently just found out there are Dyson spheres is the only way to describe these dozens of stars that are dimming. There would have to be a Dyson sphere or a Dyson swarm where they're collecting all the solar energy to be at least a K2 level, Kardashev scale level civilization. So I think that people are scared of the future, and the future hasn't run out just quite yet. And people, racism back in the 1950s, 80% of people said that it was against the law to have a black man marry a white woman. Well, just now recently, that level has gone down to 2%. And there's 98% says that you should be able to have interracial marriage, gay marriage, whatever you want to do. We need to have more freedom, not less freedom. So the more the merrier. And I'll listen to anybody, whether they're tall Nordics, grays, AI, or any higher being. I'm willing to be a diplomat to negotiate with, because once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, is the solution, which is the Constitution. God bless you. Live long and prosper.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim. And the Kardashev scale is, of course, a measure of the energy usage of a civilization. When we get to level 1 on the Kardashev scale, that means we will have harnessed the Earth's energy for the benefit of humankind. And hopefully that is something that we could achieve this century if the transhumanist vision is realized. But yes, eventually much higher levels on the Kardashev scale could be possible. We could be a civilization that harnesses the energy of the entire solar system or our galaxy or multiple galaxies. And wouldn't it be great if we as individuals could live long enough to observe all of that and experience all of that? Now, we have one question from our viewer, Skippity Doo. How close do you think we are to morphological freedom? So you mentioned diversity, and the idea of morphological freedom is essentially people could be whom they want to be. So achieve whatever form they wish through science and technology, but it would have to be real. It wouldn't just be imagined or assertions of identity. Like if you want to be biologically young, you can't just say, I'm young now. You would have to undergo age reversal. So do you think we are close to that? Do you think we still have a lot of progress left to achieve that in 2 minutes?
I'd like to answer that real quick. I believe that metamorphical and morphological freedom is sooner than possible. I think within the next decade, once we have the nanorobotics, he'll be able to change anything you want to about yourself and be able to do it with strong science backed behind it. And real quick, my secret sauce to being a great communicator besides Winston Churchill is also my brain right now has been rewired with royal jelly, Beekeeper's Naturals, which is what is given to the queen bee in the honeybee hive that lives 7 years, while the drone bees that only have pollen and regular honey only live 6 months. It was Methuselah's secret to live 969 years old in the Old Testament of the Bible, the Torah. So it's royal jelly. It is what is used for that, as well as for youth, eternal youth, basically. Royal jelly. I'm 40 years old. My students think I'm like 21. They can't believe it. Same with each of you. You are more wise than your eyes disguise. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim. It was a pleasure having you as our guest today. This was quite a wide-ranging discussion. We made connections across many disciplines and fields of human endeavor. You have an encyclopedic set of knowledge about various subjects, and it was fascinating to hear you bring in these various disciplines and pursuits to your answers to particular questions. It's not often that we hear that, but your mind works in a fascinating way, and it's a way that could contribute to our cause, to the advancement of transhumanism and to the progress of our civilization. So I wish you the best in all of your many endeavors. I hope they will contribute to our goals, and I hope that we can all live long and prosper.
Honey.